members of the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago, all other members of Parliament, permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries of the various ministries in the public service, all our mayors and chairmen of municipal corporations, chairmen of boards, members of various boards, captains of industry, large and small, representatives of civil society, members of the media, fellow citizens all of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Let me begin by welcoming all those of you who have taken time out from your originally planned schedule to accept our invitation to participate in this, I dare say, inaugural, if not unique, spending of a day. Fellow citizens, we at this time in our country's history are called upon in the face of great challenges to safeguard our future. And I want to begin my presentation this morning, which will not be too long, hopefully, but to begin by focusing on dealing with the deficit and restoring growth in our nation. Because among all the challenges that we face, and we do face a number of very serious challenges, this can be distilled out of that basket of challenges as the number one all-encompassing challenge. And it's an undisputed fact that in whatever area of governmental decision-making, the one thing that stands out and which will always be the national conversation is that there is never one option available to address any national problem. It is always about choice of option and selection of priority. This being so, one should not be overwhelmed by contrary views, but as a people, we must have the maturity to sensibly confront our circumstances, whatever they might be, and take the best option available under the current circumstances. Options that give us the best chance to overcome whatever difficulties which challenge us, especially when our challenges are time sensitive. Today, we want to lay on the table the basic facts. And there's no question that most of the country is now well aware of the very bad economic and financial situation the country fell into, and the new government coming into office inheriting this in late 2015. After enjoying energy sector revenues in the form of taxes and royalties, in 2010, those earnings were $15.7 billion. In 2014, they were $19.4 billion. In 2016, $1.6 billion. And with a little improvement in the oil price above $50, we got a little improvement in the supplemental petroleum tax. And for 2017, we are looking at $2.1 billion. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, and may I add, boys and girls, the government was faced with a fall in revenue from our main revenue stream, a fall of approximately 90% in its main revenue source between 2014 and 2017. And sometime during the day, there's a graph on the, look at it in the line graph then, that's the pathway we have traveled since 2010 or thereabouts. And the blue line indicates our travels. From 2015, with a massive drop in revenues, the government was faced with bills for running the affairs of the country, which it simply could not discharge. In this situation, one of the main concerns of the government was the level of public payroll employment. The government is clearly one of the largest employers of labor in the country. And since government revenues have declined so precipitously as they did, it is to be expected that public sector employment would be in serious jeopardy. The government has been at pains to keep the level of employment stable, even as we wind down the expenditure highs. Compounding this bad revenue situation in a second dimension of the economic difficulties facing the country, the chronic minimal economic growth situation in the country constitutes a major difficulty. The fact is that for the past 10 years, the economic growth of the country has been on a slight downward trend. So even if we enjoyed a few growth spurts in that period, we were not able to maintain the growth, far less increase it. And the graph that is on the screen now indicates where we've been going. And I might add that budgeting during a significant part of this period was deficit budgeting. Even in the face of significant revenues, as the graphs will show, we were in fact spending at levels which included significant borrowings and deficit financing going forward without any diversification of the economy, as you would hear the demands from certain quarters and from all quarters, I might say. But during that period of high revenue and high spending, we have to admit that we didn't include any diversification. What we had was a growth rate of 4.5% in 2007. It moved down to 3% in 2013, and we had been declining steadily since then, moving into negative of 3% by 2016. The growth situation and the revenue position are no doubt related, since government revenue is a major portion of the country's national income. In simple language, a lot of business, a lot of spending, a lot of contracting in this country, the nature of the economy, is dependent on government's revenues and government expenditure. This means that even as it tries to stabilize the revenue situation, the government is duty-bound to get the growth process restarted, since it is growth that will bring new revenues for the government. How do we cope with this situation? Over the past 2 years, in an effort to keep expenditure stable, the government has been seeking to plug the gaps in its revenue. However, the government has always been cognizant of the fact that a healthy, sustained revenue position will depend on how much growth can be engendered. What the government has not been able to do yet is to break through the shackles of the Constitution, especially as they apply to tax collection and the Board of Inland Revenue. The revenue situation facing us in 2018 remains a very challenging one, and the government will be taking steps necessary to ensure that it will be tightening its revenue collection mechanisms. This country, out of necessity, should remain open to any and all suggestions to boost revenue levels. We are hopeful that today, even at this late stage, useful suggestions can still be put forward, if not for Monday, budget day, but surely for the months and years ahead. Today is simply a day where as a boost of public information, all known and ready options are allowed equal time so that the population could draw its own conclusions as to the efficacy and likely consequential outcomes of the various options advanced from any quarter, whether it be government, academia, or the pontiff. Equally important will be measures the government will take to better control its expenditure. We will put in place new expenditure monitoring systems and a new procurement system which should see expenditure levels lower than the present. We are mindful of the loud calls to reduce government expenditure, and we have certainly been moving in this direction. From a level of record planned spending of $63 billion in the budget of 2015 to 2016, the incoming new government immediately, cautiously moved it down to $53 billion in 2016-2017, a reduction in expenditure of more than 15%. And you may recall, at the onset, coming into office on September 9th and a budget in October, one of the first mandates that the government gave to the public service with respect to the budget of 2015-2016 was to implement a 7% cut across the board without cutting personnel at that time. The government knows that it has to be cautious about dramatic expenditure cuts because of the possible negative impact on the level of economic activity in the country in an already contracting economy. What the government has been able to avoid is putting the economy in a steep and dizzy downward spiral because of the necessary expenditure cuts. Having said this, though, the country needs to know that faced with a possible deficit in 2018, significantly about $18 billion, some further cuts in expenditure will be unavoidable. There will be some things which the country may want to happen in 2018, which will have to be postponed. This is where the patience of the population will be important to our national success. As we position ourselves to do more with less in the future, we will have to hold some strain for now. Having said that, we would of necessity have to now embark on development program initiatives involving some government spending and, most importantly, the mobilization of significant private capital to stimulate the economy from stable to growth, if only slowly at first, then to sustainable acceleration. In this connection, we would call on the country to support the national effort as we seek to prioritize the use of our limited inflows of foreign exchange. We will not be going back to the exchange controls we had in place before 1993. But we will certainly not be using up our foreign reserves to keep the exchange rate at levels which will maximize our imports. When we took the decision in 1993 to let the market substantially determine the rate of exchange, we were accepting in principle that we would live with any rate of foreign exchange market conditions determined. It is nevertheless true that when we were in a period of favorable foreign exchange inflows, if the market called for a big change in exchange rate, we would use our reserves and put our economy and our currency in the market to keep the rate at a level which we were comfortable with. However, in this period of significant decline in foreign exchange inflows, it will be unreasonable and dangerous to use up our foreign exchange as we were accustomed to. This would be paving our way into the arms of the IMF, and that is something that this government is not prepared to do. What this means is that the only way in which the exchange rate will be held to its traditional level is if we cut back our demand, bringing the demand more in line with the reduced inflows. This is where prioritizing comes in. Our basic position here will be that first priority for foreign exchange will be given to those firms or industries that generate reasonable amounts of prospects of foreign exchange earning. If the demand for foreign exchange is not curtailed, we will eventually be forced to live with a rate determined by the market with all the deleterious consequences of that. This is where holding strain and varying our taste come in. But what do we see beyond the fiscal deficit? As we said before, the government is fully aware that we have to go beyond dealing with the gap between revenues and expenditure, as important as this is. What we have to do is to trigger the growth process in the economy and take the steps required to sustain growth once it has been restarted. The basic strategy here is a simple one: getting the private sector to invest in targeted sectors or industries. Over the coming 3 years, the government intends to pick a number of sectors to lead the revival and will work with the private sector very closely to ramp up activity in these areas. And these sectors include export manufacturing, tourism, housing, maritime services, agriculture, financial services, and creative industries, not necessarily in that order. To begin with, the fiscal regime will be configured to support the spawning of new businesses and getting existing businesses to adopt new modes and new lines of activity as we work towards finding and entering new markets within the region and beyond. 3 or 4 sectors will be selected each year with projects aimed at generating foreign exchange and new levels of output. The expectation is that the phenomenal investment we have made in education and human capital over the years will get opportunities to bear fruit for the country at this time. The table that I can put up there indicates how we proceed, starting in year 1 and sustaining those initiatives across to year 3, and then we start new ones in year 2 and repeat the process. And the final vertical column shows the foreign exchange, the bottom, the total foreign exchange by an aggregation of those components from year 1 to year 3. And we expect that that would kickstart the economy, and we maintain that kind of approach to sustain whatever growth we would have initiated. So the government will set up an implementation team to ensure that the specific objectives of the growth strategy are realized. This means, with a 2017 GDP estimate of $145 billion, new output in the first year is targeted at just over $2 billion. In the second year, just over $3.5 billion. And in the third year, about $4.5 billion. Moreover, with government revenues running at just about 25% of GDP, the expectation is for the deficit to be put on a declining trend, starting with a reduction of $500 million in the first year and climbing to a reduction of $1.1 billion in year 3. These are the targets that will be set, and the implementation team would work towards that. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not for me today to try and rehash all that has been said. It is simply for me to introduce to you those who have made it or who have been working on these situations on a daily basis, and hoping that the population would pay attention to our facts. And As we discuss them here today and look at some of the many options that many of the present speakers might put on the table, to be able to determine whether the options that we are choosing at this time or holding out for the future are in fact the best options given the basket of possibilities. Because as I said before, there is never one option available in governmental decision making. I have seen it said that we are not going to the IMF, but we are in fact administering IMF austerity programs. I don't know if that is so, but the programs that we are in fact administering to the business of Trinidad and Tobago are programs initiated, endorsed, and executed by us. And the point is, as we prescribe these medicines, many of which are not painless, but all of which have the prospect of a recovery to good health, we are far better off administering these potions as mixed by ourselves and administered by ourselves at a pace at which we can swallow. Failure to do so is to have prescriptions administered to us at a pace where we would have no choice but to swallow as administered. I have not mentioned subsidies, but I'm sure that it would be a word that will find its way in today's discussion or presentations. And today's discussion is not meant to be a preparation for the budget, but of course, if anything comes out here today which can find its way into the budget is not yet cast in stone. But the preparation of the budget started since May, and a lot of work has gone on, and the budget is due to be presented on Monday. And there's, of course, the mid-year review, another opportunity to intervene. So the door is wide open. However, at the end of the day, the government has, on behalf of the population, in all these difficult buffeting circumstances, we have to make decisions and move forward, press on, even if there are storms ahead, even if there are whirlwinds ahead, even if there are quicksand ahead. So the government, on behalf of the people, we choose the options that the circumstances demand. And today is a day of facing up to our circumstances and discussing our options wide open. Permit me one deviation, and that is, it's a wide open country. It's a free country, graced with defense of free speech. But some of our citizens prefer to make their contributions in secret behind closed doors. Of course, today, those presentations will not be available, so we will not be able to assess them. But with time, they will be exposed, and we'll also be able to look at them against all that was put out here today. Because at the end of the day, we want to know all our options, our outcomes, and our possible consequences. So, I thank you all for taking part, particularly those presenters who will give us their points of views not crafted or honed within the environment of government. But from all quarters, there are perspectives, and today is a day of perspective. We call it Spotlight. Welcome to Spotlight on Trinidad and Tobago.